morning, everyone. There's a remarkable commandment in this week's Torah portion. It says, Lo tita'ev Mitzri. You shall not hate, despise an Egyptian. Why? Ki ger hayisa bi'artzom. Because you were foreigners, strangers in their land. What the Torah is telling us is that although the Egyptians persecuted us and enslaved us and drowned our babies in the Nile, we should not bear anger or a grudge, resentment, hatred towards Egyptians. Why? Because before they enslaved us, they hosted us. If you recall, when Joseph was viceroy in Egypt, Jacob and his family came to live in Egypt, and the Egyptians provided them with hospitality. And therefore, despite the evil that they performed against you, you have to recall the good kindness that they performed and never hate them, because you owe them a debt of gratitude. Now, this in itself is remarkable because it teaches us a very powerful lesson. When we have a disagreement with someone, or worse, we have a falling out, we must remember the good times. We must remember the kindness they performed. The bad that they did does not cancel out the good. The good remains eternal. And therefore you have to not necessarily love them, but surely not hate them. But there's a second powerful lesson here. You know, unfortunately, you see sometimes when people get divorced, which is actually a commandment, law in this week's Torah portion, the laws of marriage and divorce. You see that sometimes after they got divorced already, they get up every day and do whatever they can to make each other's lives miserable. And the sad thing is, you got divorced because you want to be separate from each other, because you couldn't work out your relationship. So why would you remain in a relationship, a negative relationship, even after you're divorced? And perhaps that's what the Torah is telling us. Don't hate an Egyptian. Why? Because if you carry hatred towards Egyptians, then you're still enslaved in Egypt. Not physically enslaved, but emotionally and psychologically, you're still a slave to Egypt if you're carrying that anger, that hatred, and that resentment. And therefore, it's for your own benefit to let go of that anger and hatred. I mentioned the other day how Israel is now providing Germany with the Arrow 3 defense mechanism technology in a sale of $3.5 billion that Israel developed with the help of the United States in Israel, that can take out missiles with nuclear, biological, or chemical warheads above the atmosphere in 1,500 feet, beyond the Earth, and bring down the missile near the location from where it was shot. And what's remarkable is that 75 years ago, the Egyptians murdered 6 million Jews. And now we are providing them with a means to defend and protect their citizens. This is a living example of not bearing a grudge or holding hatred, because you are the one that suffers when you do so. There was a story in Israel that there was this apartment building that two tenants got into a fight because one extended their balcony and it blocked the view of the other, and they got into a big disagreement and a fight over it. And not only weren't the families talking to each other and fighting actively, but all the residents in the building took sides. And there was this feeling of angst and this feeling of mistrust and resentment towards neighbors against one another. And one day, one of these individuals who got into this fight with his neighbor had a son, and the other one had a daughter. So he called the adult daughter from his neighbor and said, let's get together and figure out how to make peace between our parents, because this is terrible. Our families are fighting, and it's just very uncomfortable living together in the same building. And so they got together to talk about a strategy, how they could bring their parents together and resolve the dispute. Well, one meeting led to another one, and they started to grow in their attraction to one another. Ultimately, they fell in love and realized that they were perfectly suited for one another. And ultimately, they announced their engagement. And when there was an engagement party, not only did the two families come together to celebrate, but the whole building came together to celebrate. And this is a perfect example of how we have to replace hatred with love. And that love, like light, banishes darkness. So the Torah says, don't carry anger and hatred. Try to find love in your heart, even for those who hurt you, because you will live a more peaceful and harmonious life. Have a